Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony, your host. Technology and changing consumer demand have become a lethal threat to publishing and to bookstores in general. Some would argue not for the better. Pity the person who doesn't know the fascination of browsing the shelves of an old-fashioned bookstore. Not the big box stores or the online literary automats that are so prevalent today. Pity the person who doesn't have the experience of visiting with the owner of a small bookstore, who knows where every title is on every shelf and the content or the fly page, just about every book in the place. It's a wonderful experience, and regrettably, too few of those centers and facilities exist today. Amid all that change, publisher Paul Nigel Harris has found a niche. His company, Harrowood Books in Newtown Square, publishes books that are sold to bookstores. You'll even find some of his books on Amazon. He'll tell us about that in a moment. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
I meant what I said about browsing a bookstore. There's in Milford, Pennsylvania, a little hamlet up in the mountains. There is a little bookstore and a book. I guess he's a binder, and I can't imagine there are too many of those left. His name is Anthony, as it turns out. His last name is Anthony, and he's got a little shop in the back.
Right.
And he can take the worst-looking book you've ever seen and bring it out, and it's leather-bound. It's just a beautiful work of art.
Right.
Those things just don't exist anymore today, unless you can find one at a high price, I expect.
Right.
I'm wandering off, though. Let's get back to Harrowood Books. What is Harrowood Publishing? And how did you get started? And tell us about some of the subjects that you're particularly interested in.
Well, we're a very small publisher. We only publish about 2 or 3 titles per year. I started in '74. I'd worked for a small company in Wynwood, and they went out of business, and I took over a lot of their inventory of books. And at that time, we were working with people like the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philly, World Wildlife Fund, International Committee for Bird Preservation. There were a lot of naturalist organizations because we were doing bird books, fish books, ichthyology, ornithology.
Mostly picture books?
Yeah, mostly, yeah. And I picked up on that business, and for some years I stayed in that field of natural history. I really started out with this book. I think I told you about this one, which was a big hit. It was a book which was printed on plastic, so you could use it underwater. So in the same way that bird watchers are so interested in the world in the forests, the same way people go underwater find themselves absolutely fascinated by fish life, and so they become fish watchers. So this book was printed on plastic and was a big hit.
Well, what does big hit mean?
Well,
give me some numbers.
We went through about 8 printings, and we were generally printing about 10,000 apiece. So we went through about 70,000 plus copies.
And how was it distributed?
It went through bookstores, it went through university stores, but most of all it went to dive stores and resorts in the Caribbean and Florida, because it covers Florida and the Caribbean, all the reef fishes of that area. So that got us off to a good start. And I continued with some of the ornithology titles, and published, for example, this book, South American Birds, with an author from Florida. And that book, these books have a known market. You know who is going to buy this book. And so if you talk about niches, you can identify the buyer and you can look for them. And so we were able to do that. And we sold probably about 5,000 in hardcover and 3,000 or 4,000 in paperback for that book.
Talk to me about these, very attractive, and these used to be called cocktail table books.
Right, right.
Beautiful covers, beautiful illustrations.
Right.
Which was the first?
Well, let me think. I think the Haddonfield book, this one here. So this is an occasion where you get into a co-publishing agreement. Books such as this, large coffee table books, beautifully illustrated.
Yes.
The houses of Haddonfield. This told the story about the preservation of Haddonfield, New Jersey, which after Cape May was the second town in New Jersey to get historic preservation coverage on a national basis. So they went through a big fight. Lindenwold high-speed line was going through. This is back, I guess, in the 70s. houses were threatened, developers were coming in, knocking down these beautiful old places, putting up apartment buildings close to the Lindenwald high-speed line, and at some point somebody said, we've got a jewel here, we need to preserve it. And they got it on the ballot. Everybody in real estate was against this woman, Joan Aiken, who ran the Preservation Society, and fought it tooth and nail. And the people of Haddonfield decided, no, we want to preserve our town. And so this is the story of that fight, and it shows you what was preserved, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and everybody in Philly would love to live in this place.
It's a beautiful little town.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And so in that case, I worked with the Preservation Society, and it was a co-publishing venture. So I didn't have to put up 100% of the cost of that.
What does a publisher actually do? And do you go after a book opportunity, or in most cases, is the idea, the concept brought to you?
Most of the time, people are coming to me, and it's word of mouth. And we are small, so we can do a kind of a particularly tailored job.
So you take the concept, or the manuscript. In most cases, there's at least a manuscript.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you take it from there.
Take it from there. We do the design, the layout, and everything from that point on. The photographs, do the scanning, do the
right
layouts,
through printing,
right through finished book. Yeah.
All right. Are most of the printers in the country, or do you go offshore for printing?
Offshore, some. For example, the Hawktails book, I think that was done in the Midwest. That's mostly a black and white book. I found that with color books, starting, was it about 15 years ago, China and Korea and places like this were offering tremendous prices. So we were able to do that book at a very reasonable price. And you have to watch the economies. I prefer not to. I prefer to buy locally. Sure. And when we did this book for the Pennsylvania Commission for Women, I thought, there's no way we can send this to China. So the Pennsylvania Commission for Women came to me and said, we want to put this book out. It's going to be a book that will give role models to African American and Latina girls. So it's 50 women, and so we give their story and show a picture of the woman. So in this case, we have a book which was done for that organization. They paid to have the production done. So we did it, and then we distribute it for them. Yes. So we sell copies of the book. We take a small percentage for the, what you call it, the handling of that. Yes. And the bulk of the money then goes back to the organization, as was done with the Mothers in Charge book here.
Which is this?
That was this book. And these are women in Philadelphia who've lost children to gun violence. About 300 kids a year get killed by gun violence. And so, again, this was a case where the book was really produced for fundraising purposes to help this organization in their peace outreach. So they're trying to help the situation with people that it has happened to, and also to try and prevent it happening further. So 2 mothers whose sons were murdered, a black lady and a white lady, and they found out by pure serendipity that their sons were killed by the same person. And so it's an amazing organization.
What a story.
Yeah. And so I'm very touched by the people that I work with.
Something like that. It's contemporary. It's compelling. Is that a book that could be adapted for film or television?
I could well see.
Of everything you've shown us so far, this, it seems to me, would be.
Well, yes. In fact, Steve McWilliams, who was the author on our latest book with Jimmy Murray, is also a documentary filmmaker, and he did work with these women and produced a couple of documentaries.
He's an award winner.
Steve's done amazing work, yeah, he really has.
And usually, at least in my experience with him, he really gravitates towards stories where there's people who are faced with adversity of some kind and somehow overcome the adversity, particularly those who are physically or emotionally handicapped in one way or another.
Yeah, he works for handicapped students.
Yeah, he does.
Students at Villanova.
Great work.
He heads that department,
Now that you've mentioned Jimmy Murray and your most recent book, this is a little different in that it's somebody's life story.
That's a biography of Jimmy Murray, and if you know Jimmy Murray, he's got a million stories.
Yeah, he is.
We might have 100 in this book, but he's got a million more.
Yeah.
So that's
How did that come about?
Again, Steve came to me. I'd published a book called Green Bananas, which was the story of Father Bill Atkinson, who is, as you may know, up for sainthood right now. He was a Augustinian priest who at the age of 19 was on a toboggan. His neck was broken. He becomes a quadriplegic. Long story short, because we have a Polish cardinal, we have a Polish pope, the Polish cardinal says to the pope, I would like this young man to continue his studies. Pope says, okay. And Father Bill is allowed to continue in his studies and against all odds becomes a priest and becomes the first quadriplegic in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church to be allowed to become a priest. And he does so. And he died 5, 6, 7 years ago at a ripe old age of about 65, which is a long life for people in that position. So incredibly inspiring guy, and Steve did a wonderful job in giving us his voice. So it was conversations. It was
like, the role Steve played in that young man's life was also inspiring because, as you know, I think it was for at least 15 years, every day, Steve went to his home, took care of his personal needs, got him dressed and ready to go off to teach.
Out of bed in the morning and dressed him and did everything you have to do.
About dedication.
2 days a week.
Yeah, talk about dedication.
15 years, yeah.
And friendship.
Yeah. Well, like many men, that friendship didn't even start to blossom for about 10 years. You know the way guys are.
Yeah.
They don't talk a lot with each other. They don't know each other too well after 10 years, but suddenly things clicked and they became fast friends. And
this title, the Life Isn't Audible, the Jimmy Murray story, this is rather recent, isn't it? It's just released.
It just came out in the last month, and we had a big release party at Villanova. And Jimmy, as you know, has networked. The guy knows so many people, and a lot of them appear in the book.
And loved by one and all.
Yeah, he really is. And so it's, as you may know, he was one of the co-founders of the Ronald McDonald Houses, which is an amazing story. And he's changed the world. So this is the story of a guy who really did change the world, because that organization now is in 60 countries, has 360 houses, has 525,000 volunteers throughout the world. And that came as a part of Audrey Evans, the Dark Road Shop, and Jimmy getting together, and Leonard Toast footing the bill, the initial seed money. And
few of us will have a legacy like that.
Right,
to have touched so many people.
Yeah, so it's a feel-good title. Although the Mothers in Charge saddened me, it also profoundly inspired me in so many ways. You know? And Jimmy did too with this book, as did Father Bill.
I'm sure you've been involved in some very interesting projects. Yeah. But as you said, you're not a vanity publisher.
No.
And explain what that means. What don't you do?
Well, I think vanity publishing, as the very word implies, is you as a publisher might be preying on the vanity of an author who just wants to have his book out, and you probably make promises of, we'll get this distributed for you, but and then they take the author's money and they print a few thousand books and sell 100 of them. And
well, I guess you just described me, because a few years ago I wanted to publish a book and couldn't find a publisher, and so I wrote it and submitted it to a publisher. And as it turned out, it was a publisher who was really in the textbook business. But it was a book that could be used as a text on communications and so on. And I paid the publisher to set it in, well, I was going to say set it in type, which of course they don't do anymore. But to set it, so I had they still call them galleys, but they're not really galleys. But I had a manuscript I could review and so on. And then they took it from there. And they promoted it somewhat, principally to university bookstores, things of that kind, and put it up on the internet and so on and so on. But I paid them. And is that a vanity book? No, well, let me tell you why I did it. I did not do it to make money, because you're not going to make money on a book like that. I did it because as a professional consultant, I wanted a book.
Well, you weren't seduced by the publisher to do it.
No, I was not.
No, you went to them and said, this is what I'd like to do. And so I
didn't need to be seduced.
They performed that function. So, I mean, it's funny, that brings to mind this book, because this book, Field of Dead Horses, which is a title which shouldn't scare you away. It's actually not about some horrific story about maiming horses or things like that. It's an incredible mystery thriller book set in 1939 in a horse farm in Kentucky. Now, in this case, the author came to me, as you're describing you did, called me up from Kentucky. I don't know how he got a hold of my name, and said, I'd like to do a book. And he described it, And he had plans, he had plans to promote it. And I said, okay. And I said, how do we get together? He said, I'll fly up to Philly. He flew to Philly. He met me. We met at a pub. I told him what I did. And again, long story short, 6 months later, I've got a book out for him. He did not want me to invest in the book. He wanted to be his baby. He just wanted to use Harrowood Books as the conduit to the book trade. And that never happened to me before. Okay, so I went ahead, not sure what would happen to it. And we got into a 10,000 copy first printing. We then he had a contact down in the South with Costco. Started to do Costco signings on weekends. Just brilliant marketing plan. He did the lion's share of the work. And we've sold about 8,000 copies of that 10,000 copy printing. And I would say 85, 90% of them have been through Costco, the others through various bookstores throughout the country and libraries. But that's a classic case of, like yourself, an author taking it on himself to have the book done, to promote it himself, to sell it himself, in which case he got the lion's share of the profits. It was great. For him, I think it worked out very well.
Now, is that also a candidate for a film or a video?
God,
I would think so.
This book...
Is that something you would do on behalf of the author?
I'm trying. This was one of those books that I finished at 3:30 in the morning. And the last time I remember doing that was when I was reading Shogun 30 years ago, and I just had to get to the end. I had to find what was the end of this book. An incredible ending, and completely took me by surprise. And very heartwarming because there's a lot of theme about fathers and sons in this book. So it really kind of appealed to me.
Are there some subjects, Paul, that you won't touch? Is it too controversial? Because they manifest a bias of some kind.
Oh, I think if it's total propaganda, I think it's negative propaganda, I won't go near it. I mean, you can't pay me to put out trash. No. Politically, there are a lot of people who take nowadays a lot of political heat for what they say and do, and so being a strong proponent of the First Amendment, I would, I'd probably fight to put a book out that somebody didn't want to see if I felt that they were speaking truth.
The business you're in has changed so much and will continue to change, largely because of technology, but also because of demographic changes as well. Younger people who have the attention span of a gnat and can't spend a lot of time plowing through an opus. But just in today's paper, I read that Barnes & Noble is continuing. It's still on the block.
Right.
And there may be a deal in the works to save it.
Right.
But you must cringe at the prospect of so few bookstores left. Or is there a resurgence in small independent bookstores, which I've heard from other people? Yeah,
interestingly enough, I mean, we had the phenomenon of in came Borders, in came Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble was always there.
Yes.
But Borders came in and knocked out, on the main line here, Borders knocked out a lot of bookstores just down Lancaster Pike. Eventually, because of Amazon, mostly, Borders ceased to exist.
Yes.
There's been a real resurgence of independent bookstores.
Why?
People want community, and I think a lot of these places are supplying a communal place. And apparently there's been I don't know what the exact figures are, 15 to 20% increase in sales through independent bookstores in the last year or two. There are developers who are actually putting bookstores in the center of developments because they realize it functions as a community place.
Because it has a coffee.
People bring children in there.
Because there's a coffee bar and you can sit and have something to eat. Yeah.
Talk, read, pick up the newspaper.
Yeah.
Let your kids go into the children's area, and they bring authors in, and they're doing much more than just selling books.
Is there also a trend towards independent bookstores that specialize in certain areas? There's one downtown, for example, I've forgotten exactly where, that seems to concentrate mostly on the environment and sustainability.
Right.
Is that part of the trend?
You have
to
that
appeal
too.
to certain niches in the market?
Yeah. I mean, classic would be the AIA bookstore that used to be down there in Philly. That was all architectural books. But yes, you do have specialty sellers, but most of the specialty sellers, I believe, are mostly going to be found online. It's so easy to go online and get anything. But online, that's, we're talking Amazon, and I don't want to sell through Amazon, to tell you the truth. And on Jimmy's book, I made this conscious decision I wasn't going to put it on Amazon. First of all, they take a huge chunk of the sale. And we sell the book, it goes on Amazon, we ship the book, we send the books out. Amazon simply sends us an electronic, here's your order, and we send it out, and Amazon takes 25, 30, 40, 45%,
really?
50%, depending on the book. I mean, I had a little book the other day that, I think it sold for about $10, and it ended up that Amazon's take was about 55% of that, because they charge you based on the retail value of a book. So kind of irks me, also knowing that they've taken away so many independent bookstores. I'd much rather give that 40% to an independent bookstore.
Yes.
And so I really want to try and get this book into all the independent bookstores and not through Amazon.
What about libraries? Are they coming back as well? I mean, here in Radnor, we just had this beautiful new library opened, which is, as you were saying before, it was a bit of a community center before, but it was designed and built more as a community center now with this beautiful edifice we have.
Yeah, exactly.
That's happening as well?
Yeah, and I tell you, my wife's from Germany, and she has said more than one time, I think the public library system in the United States is one of the greatest things because it offers so much, it gives children so much, and it deserves our support. So, I definitely want to say support your local library.
but a few years ago, we had a second home, and we had a rather large number of books. They were fiction, nonfiction, and so on. And I took them to the local library, which is a wonderful, wonderful community center up there, up in the mountains. And I couldn't give them away. They didn't want them. And I wondered if it was because most of what they had was now on electronic. And they didn't want to take up the shelf space to put more books up that people probably weren't going to go to read.
That's true. That happened in media. I noticed when I went to the library in media, there's a lot less on the shelf. So they're catering to the new generations. Yes. And unlike you and I, who probably are not real happy reading a book on a tablet.
No, I can't do it.
The kids maybe feel uncomfortable. Maybe they think it's a big drag having to lug about this big piece of book. I can fully see the benefits of carrying 30 books on a Kindle reader. Yeah. Sounds great. Go to the beach, try it flying an airplane, have it there. So I would probably have it and use it for that purposes. I don't, but I can see the use.
I'd rather pack a few books.
Yeah.
And take it with me.
I smell them, the smell of them, the feel of them, the smell of the ink.
There's no substitute for that, really, isn't it? For anyone who's had the experience in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I still remember as a kid, even in grammar school, having projects that required that I be in the library for days or weeks at a time in the summer, and then show up in the fall with my project as a result of the time I spent in the library, whether it was a book report or doing some research of some kind. It was a wonderful experience. Which I think, regrettably, too many of today's youngsters just don't have and never will have, because it's too easy for them now to go to their little machine.
Well, I've got an 11-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, and they still love to read books. Yes. So they still like to be read too. They still enjoy their reading. Yeah. They also want to be on the iPad playing games, but.
It seems to me that someone in your business is kind of at an inflection point, if not now, in the not too recent past, or certainly in the coming up. How will you reinvent yourself as the industry continues to change?
Well, I definitely think we're going to have to, and to be quite frank with you, Jimmy's book is the first time I've put a book into what's called EPUB files, which can be read on Apple, can be read on the Kindle, can be read on the Nook Reader, which is Barnes & Noble. And so we will go with that book into that. So that'll be my first foray into that field. The advantage to a publisher, of course, is that when you don't physically have to produce, as we did, 5,000 copies of that hardcover book, you can go out there, you can put all the investment and time up front that you normally do with a book, produce an electronic version, put it out there, And from that point on, once you've paid for all of your fixed time, editing costs, etc., everything after that is profit. So you're not quite so under the gun financially with an ebook. So if you know how to market that way, and I don't yet, but we will, and we're going to be doing it with Jimmy's book, we'll have to go in that direction.
But the traditional approach, correct me, was always you go out, you lead with a hardcover, follow up with a soft
cover,
and then you go to an ebook.
Exactly. So with this book example, libraries are going to want to used to want to have the hardcover book. So you started out with a hardcover book, they purchased that, yes, and you made more money on that hardcover book, and that helped to finance the paperbacks and so on. So yes, I think it's probably going to be a mix in the future. Digitally producing a book, Jimmy's book, 5,000 copies, we wouldn't go digitally. So we can produce, I've had somebody come to me, and it's funny, thinking about D-Day. Right now, I've had 2 veterans who've came to me and wanted me to put a book of their wartime stories. And the one guy who was in Manayunk, Nick Myers, we did a little book for him years ago, and that was his memoirs of World War II. He'd reached that point where he finally wanted to talk about it.
Yes.
We probably did a couple hundred books for him, gave him the books. He took the books. I had another guy not long ago, Pat Riggy, unfortunately died recently. As you know, they're all dying. And we did 30 copies for him. We did 30 copies of a paperback. Yeah. He wanted to share it with his family. And fell in love with Pat. I loved him. And I really missed the guy. But that was a case where we could, by digital printing, do 30 copies at not too huge a cost.
2 weeks ago, I was with a friend I hadn't seen for some time, and she loves to travel. And she spends a good deal of her time and money with her grandchildren, taking them on these wonderful trips.
Right.
And she brought back and showed me a book, a bound book, beautiful photos of the trip they had just taken to some part of Africa or something like that. But the animals and these wonderful experiences. But that was certainly a vanity book, I guess.
Well, that was her photo book.
Yeah, exactly. And aren't there companies that specialize in that?
I think
you
Apple
couldn't do that.
Shutterstock
You couldn't do that very cost effectively.
I couldn't compete with that. But you know, if you start doing 25, 50 copies, I can compete. Those things are generally a few copies, and they're wonderfully done. Yeah,
well, I'm delighted to spend the time with you. I wish you well as your industry continues to change. Again, not always for the better.
Thanks very much.
But hang in there.
We're hanging in there.
We need people who have a link to the past.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure.
Pleasure.
My guest today has been Paul Nigel Harris, who is a local publisher in Newtown Square. His most recent offering is the Life is an Audible, the life story of Jimmy Murray, who was the former GM of the Eagles and co-founder of McDonald's. They can get this online, I assume?
Yeah, lifeisanaudible.org.
That'll do it. Okay, thanks. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves